Hello and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Sam Grover, Senior Litigation Counsel at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And this week we're taking a look at a case currently before the U.S. Supreme Court that will determine if parents have the right to opt their kids out of lessons that include LGBTQ-themed books in the name of religious freedom. Joining me for that discussion is Hirsh Joshi, one of our legal fellows, and staff attorney Nancy Noet. Hello, Hirsh and Nancy, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, for your first of many appearances, I'm sure.
The inaugural, yes.
Yeah. And Hirsh, welcome back.
Oh, always great to be here.
Yeah, it feels weird welcoming you when you're probably on here more than I am, but
Fair enough.
but still, welcome. All right, so as always, we want to hear your thoughts on the topics we discussed today. Please leave your questions in the chat below or email them to askanatheist@ffrf.org. We'll try our best to answer your questions live during the show. All right, so Nancy, can you start us off by telling us, our viewers, a little bit about the case? What's this all about?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Maybe not happy because this might be another poor ruling from the Supreme Court, but we will see over time. This is a case where parents in Maryland sued the school district that a number of their children attend school in over an opt-out. You mentioned that at the start of the program. An opt-out was something the school district initially had allowed for parents to excuse their kids when certain books and lessons related to those books might be taught as part of the curriculum. And the school district discontinued that opt-out provision, sparking this lawsuit. Not coincidentally at all, the books at issue that these parents are objecting to include characters who are members of the LGBTQ+ community exclusively, as well as trans kids and other characters, and related to that, certain guidelines that the school district put out when and if there might be questions that the kids would have should the books be read in the classroom. For instance, if a child comes to you and says, well, what does it mean to be transgender? There might be a little guidance provided to say, well, kids identify as transgender, this is what it means. And really they were intended to teach the kids, I think, civility and rules of civility and how to be kind and appropriate to one another, knowing that we live in a pluralistic society where there are differences and different people, there are different races, different genders, different gender identities. I think that was the goal here. And now the parents are displeased because they cannot excuse their kids from these lessons, and they argue that this is a violation of their religious freedom.
Right, so that's the crux of the matter, right, is whether just being exposed to the idea that we live in a pluralistic society where, some people, reading books that acknowledge the existence of gay people is essentially like whether that in a classroom violates religious freedom.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think we have a news clip on the case from a local station in Baltimore that will describe it in their words.
An upcoming case at the U.S. Supreme Court pits Montgomery County parents against their own school district. The justices will debate whether parents have a right to opt out their children from lessons with books on LGBTQ issues.
Maryland Attorney General Anthony Brown joined 18 other state AGs in urging the Supreme Court to support a ruling that prevents parents from opting out their kids from school material they say violates their religious rights. Some of the books for elementary school students include Pride Puppy, Uncle Bobby's Wedding, and Born Ready. The Montgomery County Board of Education added the books in 2022 under its language arts curriculum. Parents were told they were not allowed to opt out their children from the books and sued the board in response. Brown wrote to the U.S. Supreme Court in favor of MCBE, arguing that, quote, declining to allow opt-outs reflects a determination that, whatever one's views about whether being LGBTQ is right or wrong, students must learn to treat LGBTQ people with respect and dignity.
Yeah, so Hirsh, let's start with you and that last statement about how the books are just teaching respect and dignity. Is that true, or is Pride Puppy turning our students gay?
Well, of course, that's the argument. That last part is definitely the argument of some of the parents, right? That merely seeing a rainbow and a dog somehow makes a human child gay now, or something like that. So, we kind of talked about this earlier. The fundamental part of this curriculum is to teach kids that gay people exist, that trans people exist. That's a fact of life. That's not something that we can ignore or say isn't the truth. Beyond that, there's nothing really to suggest some indicia of coercion or to like change them into either being part of the community or not being Christian or religious whatsoever. So one thing I do want to note about this case is that Montgomery County, Maryland, is the most religiously diverse county in America, apparently, at least according to the Montgomery County parents and their lawyers. And this coalition of parents are also from multiple faiths. So somehow multiple faiths think that seeing a rainbow flag violates the religious beliefs, and that's what they're bringing before the Supreme Court now.
Right. So, yeah, I asked my question a little bit in jest, but not only are these books not turning students gay, the books aren't even taking a moral stance on whether, being a member of the LGBTQ plus community is right or wrong, good or bad. It's literally just acknowledging that people like that exist, right? And having literature in the classroom that reflects the diversity of the actual student and adult population that exists in the community, right?
Right, and even on top of that, just, you cannot harass or bully people, right? So if you're just taking this at its base of civility, this is to teach kids how not to harass or bully other kids. That is something that the law actually demands of some of these school districts and even universities and colleges, that you do have to train people, obviously at very different levels depending on how young or old your students are, but you do have to have these anti-harassment and bullying techniques, and this is the way that the school district chose to do it. I don't really see how that would be unlawful or unconstitutional in any way that George Washington would have imagined all the way back in 1791.
Yeah. So Nancy, do you want to speak a little bit then to what the parent plaintiffs in the case are arguing, why they say this is a violation?
Yeah, I think they've made a couple of different claims. One is broader, and I think recognizing that they may not prevail on the broader claim, which we hope they don't, they've also have a fallback on this opt-out provision. But the broader claim is just generally, if there are these policies and our kids are being exposed, mere exposure, you brought it up in the introduction, merely being exposed to viewpoints in these books that contradict our religious beliefs, it is a violation of our parental right to raise our kids according to those religious beliefs. And as Hirsh mentioned, some of these books have, Uncle Bobby's Wedding, I think, is going to be discussed a little bit in a clip, and we'll talk about it later, is about a little girl who is upset that her uncle is getting married and she might not see him as much anymore. He happens to be marrying another man, and that is the extent of the exposure, if you will, in that text that kids would learn about. And really the lesson is, no, this is an addition to your family, and Uncle Bobby is still going to be your uncle, and everything's going to be okay. That's a message that I think most of us can get behind, except, at least in this circumstance, it seems, the inclusion of LGBTQ characters. And of course, that the similar story could be told if there were a straight marriage, perhaps interfaith or interracial, and it's incidental, frankly, to the story. It's just something that happens in life. But the parents' objection broadly is any exposure that extends beyond our religious beliefs, and any exposure whatsoever. We want the ability to opt our kids out, and that really is kind of the fallback here. I think they'd just like to object to these books and get rid of them, which frankly the opt-out may result in ultimately is a bad result. But they want the ability to be notified when and if any such book might be available or read in the classroom, and then have the ability to have their child excused and perhaps read a different book, or just have a different lesson during that portion of the day. And this would extend to apparently every book that's in the library and the school curriculum.
Okay, so the Freedom from Religion Foundation filed an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief. In this case, it's not our lawsuit, but so we're filing this other type of brief to the Supreme Court. And Hirsh, you helped draft, Nancy, Hirsh, and I all helped draft this brief. But Hirsh, would you like to say a little bit about what our arguments to the court were?
Sure. So, we are First Amendment lawyers, fundamentally. So we obviously had to give our expertise on this. So there were really two main arguments here that Nancy brought up, and we just wanted to make sure that the court understood that both were really bad. So one was this historical argument that the First Amendment sort of gives this right to an exemption. And we go into detail of past cases that the Supreme Court took that up with and kind of just slapped them down, including the fact that the petitioner seemed to lie about one of the cases, calling it a free exercise case where it wasn't one. And we go back all the way in time to the point where the Supreme Court created another right within the Due Process Clause. But another argument that we came up with was this hostility argument that the petitioners pushed, which was, certain words were said by the board sort of against religion when they took away the opt-out policy. And the petitioners argued that that actually was hostile toward religion. But we laid out how that wasn't really the case. And they cited, this famous case, Masterpiece Cake Shop, where Jack Phillips was told by a commission that he had to make cakes for people no matter what the sex of the couples were. And he successfully argued that when the commission told him, your religious beliefs are like the Holocaust, that would be against his religious belief, that would be hostile toward his religion. But that was in the adjudicative context, as we know. That's not quite what happened in Montgomery County, and we just wanted to let the court know that they are overreading some of those cases to make this weird point that, if you say anything at all against religion, then you can strike down an entire law, a statute, no matter what.
Yeah, so that's a fair summary of what we were arguing in the case. And I guess our third argument is that the record in this case is pretty deficient right now to actually grant what the parents are asking for, right? They're asking for this preliminary injunction that would prevent the district from going through with this plan of including these books in its curriculum. But at this stage in the case, no student has actually, been exposed to this book. We don't know how the books are going to be taught in the classroom. And so that's another way in which we're hoping the court could come up with a narrow ruling. And we'll talk more about why we think the court might side with the parents later. But if the court is going to side with the parents, we'd like them to do it on this narrow grounds that basically kicks the case back to for more factual findings.
So I think at this point we're going back to the news story that we began the program with to respond a little bit to an argument from the law firm supporting the option to opt out of the LGBTQ. They're not really themed lessons, but related lessons, I'll call them that.
The coalition of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish parents suing MCBE are represented by the Beckett law firm, which argues the books violate the religious rights of the parents under the Free Exercise Clause. Beckett asked the Supreme Court to hear the case after a lower court rejected their push to require schools to offer an opt-out option for parents. Michael O'Brien, one of Beckett's lawyers, said the Supreme Court historically backs the rights of parents.
The law, since before the founding of the country, has always recognized that parents know and love their children best and have the right to direct the religious education and upbringing of their children. And the Supreme Court has built off that over the past century.
Yeah, so Hirsh, is that true, what he says? Like the Supreme Court has always backed the right of parents to, dictate the religious upbringing of their children?
No, not even close. And that's exactly what one of the sections of our brief actually laid out, that when this entire, he used the phrase direct the upbringing of children, and that's directly referring to a 1920s era case. But since then, parents have only really won once, and that was in the most extreme situation, where Wisconsin, ironically, was forbidding an entire group of people from choosing what school between private school and public school to go to. That's a very extreme situation compared to sort of an a la carte curricular exemption. So what he said there in that clip is just totally false.
Yeah. So parents, the religion is left to parents to discuss with their children and to, dictate what, sort of moral beliefs are going to be preached in the home. And schools are left to, teach actual, curricular lessons, and if part of those lessons involves acknowledging the existence of minority groups, that's always been permissible.
Right, and even in the one case, the one time that the parents won, the court there did say, listen, we're not a school board. We're not going to pretend like we know what's best in all situations. Just in this one situation, in this one anomaly, we're going to make this call. But other than that, do not look to us to resolve your curricular exemptions.
Yeah, so what are the sort of broader national implications if the Supreme Court says, actually, the right to dictate the upbringing of your children means that you can sort of a la carte pick what lessons are permissible in public schools for your kids?
Right, and one context we've seen this in, and Florida usually gets this, is don't say gay bills, and of course any bills that might restrict the teaching critical race theory in the classroom, where you can have parents say, Christianity teaches me not to discuss anything antebellum, I guess, so don't teach anything prior to the Civil War to my kid. Now, I don't know how you'd understand the First Amendment if that were the case, but you could select what material would be taught to your own child, and you really just erase an entire other group of people from your child's learning or curriculum. But you could also not teach them bad facts about your own people, so to speak. So that's really what the critical race theory ban would look like, where you might have some students or some parents say, I don't want my child to grow up with white guilt or something like that. So I'm going to have them exempted from any lessons in slavery or the Civil War.
Nancy, do you think it serves kids as members of our society to not have to grapple with the existence of, minority groups, people who think or act differently than themselves?
My short answer is obviously no. I mean, I think we all benefit from the diversity and pluralistic society we live in. That said, I said this repeatedly when we were briefing our case. You can't opt out of life. We're all different in certain ways. And I happen to believe that's a good thing. But even for those who don't, they're going to encounter people who are different from themselves as they go forward. And I mean, I think we live in a time where people can be awfully cruel. That's always been the case, and sometimes particularly so for children. But everything is so contentious and frankly ugly on the political realm and beyond. Let's find ways to be kinder to ourselves and to others. And these books and these guidelines are very much in that vein. They happen to fall on the LGBTQ focus in this particular instance, but extends far beyond that. And if parents are able to opt their kids out here, where does it end? And are schools going to be left to do their jobs, which is really to teach our kids a lot of different things, ranging from math to history and other things. And so many things are objectionable, and I question whether there may be attempts, if this opt-out becomes a thing that goes nationwide, are parents going to resurrect claims, like evolution was something that a lot of folks were displeased about, and they want their kids to believe in creationism. They lost that fight. Is that going to be resurrected as, well, okay, you can teach evolution, but I want my kids to be able to opt out. I think the Earth is only 6,000 years old, and so I don't want any contradictory teachings that my kid is going to see. I mean, I don't know what these kids will be left to learn in schools at some point. And so that's my fear, is just where does this go and where does it end?
Right, and that's one stark contrast between what the parents are asking for here and what some school districts provide in terms of targeted opt-outs for things like sex education curricula, right? Where that's like a discrete lesson that if kids opt out of that, it's not part of a broader, curriculum, like a year-long literature program, right? So you have that on the one hand, but then if you have to teach biology, and then you need to create a separate biology curriculum that doesn't acknowledge the existence of evolution, that's a huge burden on a public school system, right? In a way that an opt-out for a discrete lesson like sex ed is not. So that's why ultimately what the parents are asking for will be untenable for most public school systems. But that's just, my opinion, our opinion as a few humble lawyers. What do the actual, the big brain legal scholars think here, Hirsh?
So in terms of a lot of the professors here, professors of the religion clauses in particular, a lot more sided with us than I thought would, including some who would be described as conservative law professors did side with us, mostly because I think they weren't as short-sighted as the plaintiffs here were, right? Just to knock the plaintiffs a little bit here, they claim that they're religiously diverse. Well, that means that if anyone else can exempt their students from a curriculum, that means that if there's a curriculum that shows religious diversity that would teach to, include people like the plaintiff's children, other children can now not receive that material because of the content of that material. So it is very short-sighted for the plaintiffs here to only pick on LGBTQ plus students, not realizing that they themselves are diverse. But you did ask about the big brains, and I assume you mean those on the Supreme Court. So yesterday, the Supreme Court heard arguments which were, to borrow my friend Nancy's word, contentious. Let's listen to one discussion between the parents' lawyer and Justice Sotomayor.
Haven't we made very clear that the mere exposure to things that you object to is not coercion?
It would really depend on the individual religious beliefs.
So what you're saying is that the exposure of children to the fact that two people are getting married is coercion? That two people of the same sex are getting married is coercion?
So our clients have not raised that objection. I suppose someone could raise that. But
let's talk about what in the portrayals, so that the mere reading or looking at the pictures, like looking at an image of Muhammad, would be coercion. Because I'm looking at the books, I've looked through all of them. They have two men, little Bobby's wedding, where they're getting married. One is black and one is white in this rendition of the book. I had one with mice. The two male mice looked identical to me. Is looking at two men getting married, is that the religious objection?
Again, it would depend on the individual beliefs of the clients. For example, many parents would object to their child being exposed to something like pornography or extreme violence. It would vary.
We're not going there. Just answer my question. Is looking at the pictures, is there any affidavit from any parent that merely looking at people getting married, holding hands, none of them are even kissing in any of these books. The most they're doing is holding hands. That mere exposure to that is coercion.
Our parents would object to that. They follow.
All right, now, so let's move to what I think your objection is. I think your objection is to the student guidance, correct?
Our objections would be even to reading books that violate our clients' religious beliefs.
Do you think it's fair to say that all that is done in Uncle Bobby's wedding is to expose children to the fact that there are men who marry other men?
I have to say my very favorite part of that is that Justice Alito read Uncle Bobby's wedding. I think that's the funniest part of all of this. I really I wish he would learn from it, and I hope that reflects in the opinion itself and hopefully his subsequent jurisprudence. I won't hold my breath for that, though.
Yeah, fair. So the attorney for the parents, it's pretty telling how he balks at Sotomayor's question 2 or 3 times, right? And says, well, the objection really depends on the specific parent's beliefs. It depends. And that is really what would be so crippling for a school district, right? Is if you need to curtail your curriculum for every possible religious objection, then you're left with very little. Right, and our amicus brief gets into that a little bit. Right, we highlight some religious freedom objections to aspects of school curricula that have been brought up in past cases and rightfully been rejected. Hirsh, do you have some examples off the top of your head?
Right, and I do. And one that actually was in that clip was the miscegenation one, right, with interracial marriages. We brought that up rightly with Othello, I think, a Shakespearean classic. So a lot of that was reiterated just as general themes, not our exact examples. But I think Justice Sotomayor, and the reason we played that clip is because she's right. I mean, you can imagine a government class which has that exact clip, and you can't play that because you have a woman working, right? And if somebody has a religious belief that contradicts that, okay, I have to step out for the part where Justice Sotomayor is asking a question to an advocate. I mean, that's so ridiculous to think about, that you have kids essentially coming in and out of classes for the parts that don't offend them.
Right, right. And presumably, right, since the state mandates that kids get a history education, you need to come up with alternative content for those students who are opting out. And I don't know what that looks like. Maybe it's just the white male justices asking questions to a white male attorney. But it becomes ridiculous, right? Trying to come up with lessons that fit every individual student's parents' religious beliefs.
Right. I mean, there's just simply no way to tailor that, right? And you only have so many teachers, and you have many students per teacher. I don't see how we can do that in a public school system at all, or even a private school system, right? I mean, there's just no way we can have this sort of one-on-one instruction for every single kid. So this would just be absolutely fatal to a lot of lessons, and almost every lesson in some way.
And it's the individual part of it, as you've said repeatedly, that is most problematic there. It's not just the Catholic Church, this is the Catholic Church's official policy on not doing same-sex marriage. It's each individual set of parents or individual parents saying, this is what I believe. It may or may not be, I guess, official church doctrine or whatever else, but when you break it down to the individual level, I mean, you put 12 Catholics in a room, I think each might have an individual and different opinion about Uncle Bobby's Wedding or other books, but each person then can tailor an opt-out. Again, I question whether the school could even keep up with those requests. I don't think they can. Right,
and so what schools districts would be left doing is catering to the loudest objections, right? The parents of usually majority religions in a community who say, these beliefs need to be catered to in the public schools. And then you'll have school districts who are sort of pre-censoring themselves, right? I mean, if women in the workplace becomes an objected to thing in a community, then you pre-censor and you just show men, right? You just incorporate men into your lesson plans. And every student in the public school misses out because of that.
Right, and so much history, especially recent Supreme Court history, where we do have quite a few women who have served at that level. And this discussion did go on between Justice Sotomayor and the parents' lawyer, where Sotomayor points out how commonplace things could be that are objected to.
We just don't find these kinds of cases or these kinds of burdens where parents are bringing extreme examples. Parents with kids really don't have a lot of time to be suing the school board, and they're looking for a reasonable compromise.
I have a whole list of cases where parents have objected to biographical, I'm quoting, biographical material about women who have been recognized for achievements outside of their home, because some people believe women should not work. So too, parents have objected to teachers reading books featuring divorce, interfaith marriage, or in modest dress. Forget about the evolution, because that's come too. You've just said, are these all coercive?
Well, again, it's whatever coercive means, they could create a burden. This court has defined burden very simply, that if someone is trying to exercise a sincere religious belief and the government is prohibiting or inhibiting their ability to exercise, that creates a burden.
If someone's prohibiting just looking at something that they object to, that's burdening their religion?
Again, we don't see these cases arise in reality.
For reality's sake, you see interfaith couples all the time walking around. You see interracial couples walking around. You see women on this court in positions of work outside the home.
So Sotomayor is framing this in terms of religious burden, right? That's ultimately the question. Well, it's one of the questions here, is whether the court should consider this a religious burden. And maybe the way this should come down is that it should be a parent's religious burden to explain to their kids how their religion feels about things that kids will be exposed to in reality, right? Maybe that is an acceptable burden to put on religious parents, and all parents, frankly, whether they're religious or non-religious. We all have moral stances about conduct that exists in reality, and maybe parents should be burdened with explaining that to their own children.
Right, and I think my favorite part of that clip, of course, was the very beginning, where the background says attorney for parents, and the attorney for the parents is saying, well, you know, people like my clients don't really have time to be bringing lawsuits against the people who we brought a lawsuit against. I just think the irony is just dripping from that, and it was just great. I do like the end as well, where Justice Sotomayor says basically what I said, that you can't show that this own clip, right, in government classes, if we really take your argument seriously, that the women on this court are working, and if somebody's religious belief is contradictory to that, then you have to exempt them from just short clips of essentially Supreme Court arguments, basically from the last few decades.
Yeah, but you could dub over the voice and have a sock puppet, and then it would be fine. So, I mean, you know, there's an alternative here.
Right, of course, yeah. You know, just
let's move on. I think we've got another clip.
Sure, and just to cap this part with the parents' lawyers, this is a clip of Ketanji Brown Jackson getting in on some of the hypotheticals, including a clever trap that she laid out.
Is your argument actually confined to the content of the school's curriculum? I mean, I appreciate that you say we're in the public school, this is a uniquely coercive environment, but what if we have a teacher who is gay and has a photo of a wedding on her desk? Is a parent able, or could they opt out of having their student be in that classroom?
Well, we think no, because the student, the student may claim a burden, but on the question of the student doesn't have the right to tell a teacher what to say. The teacher has speech rights.
But I guess I don't understand that, given your argument.
I don't understand what the lawyer was getting at either.
No, I don't either. I mean, it seems like the answer would be yes, given their argument, right? That exposure to certain things would constitute a burden on their religion. So yes, actually, if you take their argument seriously, a teacher having their own wedding photo in a same-sex wedding, or even if it were an opposite-sex wedding, but you get somebody who objects to that, that would actually create a burden under the petitioner's theory here.
Yeah, and being a transgender teacher in the classroom would create a constant burden on those parents' religious beliefs to, justify the existence of that teacher in front of their student, right? So you could see this getting extremely out of hand very fast, and having massive implications for LGBTQ+ teachers.
I mean, even short of having a transgender teacher, even a cisgender man who is a teacher, who is in a role that is not one that men have typically assumed for the last so many decades. It's not a stereotype that we usually think of when we think of teachers. That alone could create a burden, right? I mean, when we think about how just obnoxious and ridiculous this could be, you can have a Christian kid who says, you know what, the Bible says that only women can be teachers. I don't want Mr. Johnson to be my teacher. Please give me a religious exemption. That's the extent that we're talking about, really. I mean, we are talking about LGBTQ+ people, and we should, but we're also concerned here with gender roles and traditional gender stereotypes that can be reinforced by apparently the free exercise clause.
Yeah, wow, that gets really confusing, because who's the gym teacher then? Does that have to be a man, or
Well, you see, Leviticus says.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. So I mean, Justice Brown Jackson's example is not as ridiculous as what we just hypothesized, but there really are some impossible line drawing problems here with the petitioner's argument.
Right, and hopefully those concerns actually make it to decision time. But I'm not as sure, especially given this next clip, which is probably the weirdest part of oral argument, and that we have to show you, considering especially how uninformed some justices are. Here is Neil Gorsuch demonstrating such, well, you'll figure it out.
Pride Puppy was the book that was used for the pre-kindergarten curriculum. That's no longer in the curriculum.
That's the one where they are supposed to look for the leather and things and bondage, things like that.
It's not bondage. It's a woman in a leather.
Sex worker, right?
No, that's not correct. No.
I read it.
It's a drag queen.
Drag queen and drag
correct.
queen.
The leather that they're pointing to is a woman in a leather jacket. And one of the words is drag queen in the search.
And they're supposed to look for those.
It is an option at the end of the book, correct?
Yeah, okay. You've included these in the English language curriculum rather than the human sexuality curriculum to influence students. Is that fair? That's what the district court found. Do you agree
I
with
think
that?
to the extent the district court found that it was to influence them towards civility. The natural consequence of being exposed.
Whatever.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I have to say that I am not going to picture Justice Gorsuch in any way other than him cowering every time he sees a leather jacket now, because that seems to be the implication, that just someone wearing a leather jacket is somehow this very different, very adult theme, and that's just so ridiculous. And I talked about how uninformed some of the justices are. Case in point right there.
Yeah. Fair. All right. Let's turn to some audience questions and see if we can tease out a little bit more about how the public is viewing this situation. So do you think the court will bend over backwards to align with the parents as they did in the Coach Kennedy case? And then a similar question, if the judges rule with the parents, do you think parents' rights groups are planning to make more challenges like this?
So yes, to the parents' rights group questions. And we've already seen some of those even well before Mahmoud got here to where it is now. One that's particularly concerning and is probably up next, maybe even next term, is what to do for school districts when a student expresses essentially gender nonconformance, right? And a lot of school districts have gender identity plans, and part of that plan is sometimes concealing the gender identity or any divergence from typical gender norms from parents. And so far, the circuit courts have held that that's not a constitutional violation. Parents don't have this right to know exactly what's going on with their child during the school day, not to mention the children's First Amendment rights are implicated in what they wear, what pronouns they go by. So that might be up next, including a First Circuit case that hopefully that doesn't get granted cert, but we'll be here just in case it does, and you might get another show like this.
Yeah. All right. So asked another way, who do you think the court will side with on this case? And are there enough indications one way or another for you to feel this way? Nancy?
Well, sadly, the tenor of the comments of the conservative members of the court lead me to believe, and they are the majority, that they will come down on the side of parental rights. Much of the questioning, and you saw it there with Justice Gorsuch, well, isn't this book part of the English curriculum to influence children? And when there was mention that, well, we're just talking about civility, whatever. And coercion is a big part of the test here. Are the materials themselves mere exposure, which is okay, or are they coercive in some way that violates religious freedom? And unfortunately, I think there are enough people in the camp of coercion. There are suggestions in the questioning that aren't these books beyond mere exposure? Aren't they suggesting that it's okay to be transgender or other things, and isn't that coercive, is where that's going to go. I mean, the honest and acceptable and right answer is no, of course it is okay to be transgender, and yet I think sadly the parents are going to win that this is somehow coercive. And I think the win, though, I believe will be limited to the opt-out, which we've already discussed will be calamity and have a devastating impact. And the remainder of that question, will things go further? Absolutely. Parents are going to take this one and start kicking in the doors of all the schools.
Yeah, right. So that's So the justices are going to pick what they think is the narrower path, most likely, which is focusing on the opt-out. but then they're just going to leave it to public school districts around the country to figure it out from there, right?
Yeah, it's a narrow path, approximately the width of the Grand Canyon is really what that turns out to be.
Right. It should not go without saying most of these Supreme Court justices did not attend public schools themselves. I think 3 of the 9 did, maybe. But they also, the conservative majority does not care if this burdens public schools, right? Placing higher burdens on public schools to conform to a loud religious minority's demands is part of the game for them. Okay, we have one other question here. Thank you for submitting questions, by the way. Is it possible that religious people who opt out could be made to provide an affidavit to show that they have themselves provided training in DEI so that the kids won't harm and embarrass others?
I suppose the one problem that you might run into that is one of compelled speech, right? Where you're now telling parents what they have to teach in the home, and it's not as though you're regulating homeschooling, right? So that could be a possibility where if you have homeschooled kids, you have regulations that say, okay, you have to teach like this history, you have to teach that history. I don't know if you can require an affidavit that just has, public school parents say, by the way, this is what we teach at home, because that might then extend the public school hours essentially to 24/7, and that's sort of the issue here as well.
Yeah, right. So it's a nice idea to say, all right, well, we need to ensure that the kids are getting, diverse lessons on diversity and civility somewhere. So if you're taking it out of the public schools, then it has to be taught at home. That's not really how our country works, right? You can't demand that parents teach certain things to their kids in the home. So instead, we're left with trying to do that part in the public schools. And this case has severe implications for that. All right, any final thoughts from either of you?
I guess I would just say we're in scary times, and this is one of several cases that our Supreme Court is about to decide. So we're bracing for impact, but prepared to continue the good fight. We'll see what happens here. The opt-out is one thing, and it sounds reasonable on its face, but I fear that it will mean the disappearance of these books because school boards, instead of trying to deal with the opt-out provisions and angry parents on that front, will simply remove the books. And then kids who are allies, members of the LGBTQ+ community, the kids of some of these parents who may be struggling with their own sexuality or gender identity will then be left without these materials. And I will say from personal experience and otherwise, visibility matters. These books do matter. Seeing characters that are like you in television, on the news, or in these books is crucial for these kids' lives. And I hope that doesn't happen, but I fear it may.
Yeah. Exposure begets empathy and civility.
That's right.
All right, on that rather bleak note, unfortunately, that wraps up this week's episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. A new episode of our broadcast TV show, Free Thought Matters, airs this weekend. FFRF co-presidents Annie Laurie Gaylor and Dan Barker will speak with former U.S. Representative Susan Wild about the importance of promoting secular values in Congress.
So we have a Speaker of the House who flies the Christian nationalist flag outside his office, which is a very grand office. The fact that he regularly invokes Christianity, Jesus Christ, and God into remarks that he makes, as do most of the other Republican members of Congress. The fact that they regularly kneel to pray in the well of the floor of the House, I think is really just not appropriate in a government location. They want to step outside and go have a private prayer breakfast or whatever, have at it.
You'll be able to watch that episode on TV stations around the country this weekend and soon on the FFRF YouTube channel.
And don't miss our weekly radio show, Free Thought Radio. You can find Free Thought Radio at ffrf.org/radio or wherever you get your podcasts.
You should also be sure to check out the latest episode of We Dissent. It's the only podcast hosted exclusively by women constitutional lawyers discussing state-church separation. Listen and subscribe to We Dissent wherever you go to get your podcasts, or just check it out online at we-dissent.org.
Finally, if you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, check out our website at ffrf.org. If you're a member already, thank you. If not, please join us. See you next time on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.